Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our work session of Las Cruces City Council. Today is Monday, February 8th, 2021. It's approximately 1 p.m. I'm going to ask for, as we say, our Pledge of Allegiance before a brief moment of silence for Officer Darian Jarrett, who lost his life, as well as wishing a speedy recovery for the two Las Cruces police officers who were injured last week as well. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And now we're going to go to our pets of the week that Jennifer Martinez from our communications office, I believe, has that information.
Yes, I do. Can you see my screen, Mayor?
Yes.
Perfect. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Jennifer Martinez with the city's communications office, and today I would like to introduce you to Bougie and Neville. First, Bougie is the queen bee. She is very energetic. She loves to go on walks. She listens very well and loves other people, but she'd like to meet any other furry friends that you have in your home before anything becomes official, just to be sure. And then we have Neville. Neville is very calm, very soft, and he is just a sweet boy who likes to cuddle. He is the most easygoing guy out there. He's ready to come home with you and to be your crazy love. If you're interested in either Bougie or Neville, you can visit them online at the Animal Service Center at ascmv.org/adoptions. Go ahead and look up their pet number. Call 382-0018 to make an appointment to meet with them. Offsite adoption events are canceled until further notice. And once again, pet licensing. Pets in Las Cruces must be registered and licensed, and you can do so through the Animal Service Center of the Mesilla Valley. Right now, they have temporarily suspended those in-person licenses, so you'll want to make that phone call, 382-0018, to go ahead and get that mailed to you or to make arrangements for it. The fees are for the altered pets, $7 per year. Unaltered pets, the cost is $50 per year. And senior citizens, they can get a little bit of a discount if they provide their proof of age with valid photo ID. The cost would be $5 per year. What's on everybody's mind right now is the vaccine, what you need to do to get registered. You can go to vaccinenm.org, or you can go to our website, las-cruces.org. We just put up in our news and announcements section a new news release to just go ahead and get people encouraged to register. So if you're interested, you can take a look at these two photos that you see on the right. They're going to give you some information on some of the questions that you might have, like who should get the vaccine? Are they safe? Are there any side effects? Are they required? And what if you've already had COVID? Go to vaccinenm.org to get those questions answered for yourself. And Mayor, I thank you for your time. Have a great Monday.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. Okay, now we're going to go to, and you have a great Monday too. We're going to go to Jobs of the Week. And I believe Darlene Lopez, I see her on the call. So Darlene.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon, council members. Darlene Lopez for the record. So for our jobs of the week, we have GIS CAD Systems Administrator, and that's with the city of Las Cruces. And also in the town of Mesilla, Mesilla Valley Regional Dispatch, and that closes on 2/22/21. We have a welder, and that's with David Koenig Enterprises, Inc. LLC, and that closes on 2/24/21. We have construction laborer apprentice, Tierra del Sol Housing Corp., and that closes on 2/24/21. We have a registered nurse for Davida Healthcare Partners, and that closes on 4/27/21. And last, we have CDL truck driver, and this is the commercial driving license for Thrust Companies, and that closes, Thrust Transportation, and that closes on 2/26/21. And for a full list of internships and opportunities, you can go to employnm.com and also to governmentjobs.com/careers/Las Cruces. And for any more information, or if you have questions that you'd like to direct specifically to the workforce, you can reach us at 575-524-6250. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have one agenda item, which is called the Great Energy Transition Implications for Municipalities, and it's by Neil Kolwey. Unfortunately, he's having a little trouble signing on, so we've got to...
He's here now.
Oh, you got it. Oh, okay, great. Oh, there you are. How you doing, sir? Let me introduce you. Let's see here. So, Councilor Sorg introduced a resolution a few weeks ago that called for a proactive planning to meet our city climate goals. We thought it'd be good to provide context for the meeting, so we invited Mr. Neil Kolwey to talk about the great energy transition implications for municipalities. He's based in Colorado. Mr. Kolwey is Industrial Program Director at the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, where he leads programs to advance energy efficiency in the industrial sector. He has an undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering and a master's in environmental management and policy. He'll be joined by Matt Fromer, an architect and planner who is the Energy Project's Senior Associate for Transportation, where he focuses on electric vehicle policy and EV grid integration. So thank you for joining us today, and I'm glad you were able to log on. So.
Thank you. Is Matt here? I don't see him.
Yeah.
Oh, you are?
Neil.
Oh, hi, Matt.
Yeah.
So excuse me, I'm sorry, before if I begin, if you wouldn't mind, when you go back and forth, because we have someone who transcribes the minutes and they don't watch the video, just say this is Matt or this is Neil speaking.
Okay.
That's it. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, great. Well, it's all yours. So the speech is what,
Thank
3
you.
hours? You're the
Thank
only
goodness,
one on
no.
the whole agenda.
All right. Can everybody see that?
No.
It looks funny on my screen.
It's just one strip.
That's what I see too. There it is.
There you go.
There it is.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for inviting us here today, virtually anyway. And my title is Industrial Program Director, but I also do a lot of work with beneficial electrification of buildings, which is kind of a long term. And my colleague Matt is going to talk about the transportation part of this. So next slide. So just a brief word about SWEEP. Some of you may not be familiar. We promote energy efficiency and clean transportation programs and policies in these 6 states, including New Mexico. We have a colleague, Tammy Feeblecorn, who lives in Albuquerque and leads our policy work in New Mexico. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit in general about what is beneficial electrification, how does it help local and state governments achieve their climate goals, and then some opportunities for Las Cruces in the buildings area, and then Matt's going to talk about transportation. Next slide. One of the reasons that we were invited to speak today is that I spoke at this conference, which was in October, again, a virtual conference, of course, but it's an example of the movement around the country towards this beneficial electrification transition. And I'm heavily involved in Colorado's chapter of the Beneficial Electrification League. And anyway, the conference was like a day long, and there were sessions about buildings and transportation. And I participated in the policy discussions. And as a result of that, became in contact with some of the people associated with Las Cruces, and they invited us to speak to you today. So next slide. So what is beneficial electrification? Basically, it means that you're switching from a fuel use to electricity. Again, that's in transportation, or it's in buildings, or in industry. And for the purpose of these 3 benefits, especially the first one, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and other air pollutant emissions, helping decrease customer energy costs, or improving the utilization of grid resources. And the classic definition that the Beneficial Electrification League at least likes to talk about is that it should improve one of these three without adversely affecting the other two. But for our purposes today, let's just say that, you know, yes, we want all these benefits, but especially the first one of helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So next slide. So there's an increasing awareness that something funny is going on with our climate, and there's just horrible fires in the last few years in California and in Colorado. And of course, one of the main contributors to those fires is climate change. Next slide. And at the same time, we're seeing a lot of floods because, long story short, the atmosphere holds more moisture. So there's like a drought for a while and it's holding the moisture, and then all of a sudden you have tremendous amounts of rain. This picture happens to be from the Philippines, but there have been some, you know, huge storms in the US, and even in Colorado 7 years ago, we had a huge flood in the Boulder area. Next slide. So what are we doing about that? States and local governments and countries are setting goals, and New Mexico has a goal to achieve 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. The Energy Transition Act will help with that. It requires utilities to achieve 50% renewable power by 2030 and 80% by 2040. So that paves the way for doing more with electrification. And then, as you probably know, you have a goal. Las Cruces has a goal of 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and 75% by 2050. And we are aware that equity is also a very important issue, as it is for many communities across the country. Next slide. Here's a look at the Las Cruces greenhouse gas emissions. As you can see, over half of it is from transportation, including all the traffic through the city, as well as, of course, the city has a fleet, which we'll talk about. And then you can see the residential and commercial buildings being about 38% of the emissions. And these are direct emissions from fuel as opposed to indirect emissions from electricity use, which is an appropriate way to look at it. Okay, next slide. So how does the electrification contribute to achieving aggressive goals? Well, first of all, we always say you want to do as much energy efficiency as possible first, because it's generally the most cost-effective way. And then secondly, reducing the carbon intensity of the electricity grid, which we just talked about with the New Mexico legislation. And then it makes more and more sense to switch fuel uses to electricity. And so again, that's what we'll mainly be talking about today. There are also opportunities in the industrial sector, and including oil and gas. And then some other pieces of the pie are some other types of emissions, not just energy, like methane from oil and gas and emissions from agriculture and the waste sectors, but the biggest piece is associated with energy use. And so the first three bullets are key. Next slide. Many other cities across the world and across the US are addressing these challenges of setting aggressive climate goals and also looking at beneficial electrification. This report highlights examples of several cities around the world. It's by an organization called C40.org. So just showing it here to show that you're not alone. There's a lot of cities who are pursuing these kinds of efforts. Next slide. So for Las Cruces in particular, we saw the resolution by Councilperson Sorg, and we're aware of the opportunities in, you have some opportunities with relation to building codes, educational efforts for new construction, some retrofits of existing buildings, and we'll talk a little bit about the gas utility. And then, as I said, Matt's going to talk about everything associated with electric vehicles. So, next slide. So a little bit of background, just briefly. What is a heat pump? Well, everybody's familiar with air conditioners, and basically a heat pump, it just is like an air conditioner that can go both ways. It's reversible. So in the summer, it works like an air conditioner, transfers heat from inside the house to the outside, and in the winter, takes heat from outside, compresses that heat, concentrates the heat, and moves it to inside. And they can be a ducted system, as shown here, like working with the furnace or the ducts, like a central air conditioning system or a gas furnace would do. Or there are also ductless systems, which we call mini splits. Next slide. So some of the benefits of heat pumps: it's heating and air conditioning in one system. Basically, it costs about the same amount to install, at least in a new home, with you have one heat pump system compared to installing a separate gas furnace and separate central air conditioning system. Compared to electric resistance heating, it's about 3 times as efficient. And compared to natural gas or propane heating, you get reduced air pollutant emissions. And depending what you have in the existing home, you get improved comfort with a good heat pump system, and you get improved safety and reduced risks of not having flame of burning natural gas in the home. Next slide. Briefly again, what is a heat pump water heater? This picture here shows you, very sexy. Looks very much like an ordinary water heater, except it has the heat pump unit on the top. The red area there is the heat pump unit. Basically, it brings in air from surrounding the unit and uses heat pump technology to heat the water. And they always use they always have an electric resistance backup and supplementing the water, the heat pump unit, so that you can get a good recovery time. So they work very well. They're very efficient. Next slide. Some of the benefits of heat pump water heaters: they're very efficient. The efficiency of water heaters is measured with what we call the Uniform Energy Factor, or UEF. And for a efficient heat pump water heater, you have a UEF of about 3.4 versus about 0.95 for electric, or about 0.7 for gas or propane. So basically, a heat pump water heater is about 3.5 times as efficient as electric, and about 5 times as efficient as the gas or propane one. And depending on the fuel, that will lower the energy costs by about 2/3 compared to the electric, and about 75% savings compared to propane. And because natural gas prices are so low currently, the annual cost would be about the same as for a natural gas water heater. Next slide. And what about the greenhouse gas emissions benefits? Well, if you take like an average house and you compare a heat pump versus a gas furnace, and looking at New Mexico's projected emissions over the next 18 years, you get about 35% lower emissions with the heat pump. And that's roughly equivalent to if you drive a 30 mile per gallon car like a Subaru Impreza, you could drive that car 4,000 miles less a year, and that would be about the amount of emission reductions you would get from the heat pump. And the heat pump water heater versus a gas water heater is about 50% lower emissions, and that would translate to driving that same type of car about 2,000 miles less per year. So it's a significant benefit. Next slide. So now we're getting into the good part. What are some suggestions for you all to consider? So first of all, we have a few suggestions for new homes, including any new multifamily homes in Las Cruces. You can do stuff with codes, which I'll talk about. You could launch some programs to help educate the developers and the architects of the benefits of new construction. And at least for city-owned buildings, you could potentially just require them to be all electric. So we'll talk about that a little. And existing homes is a little more challenging to make it cost effective, but you could look at some programs to do retrofits, and having incentives would be very helpful. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And also, as kind of a first step, you always want to consider better insulation and sealing as a sort of foundation, and then to think about new, more efficient equipment. Okay, next slide. This is from a fact sheet that Sweet put together. It's available from our website. All our stuff is free, of course. And in a nutshell, an all-electric new home, and this applies to all-electric multifamily as well, would generally have these three benefits. Should be better for health and safety, as I mentioned a little bit, no open flames, no carbon monoxide. Oh, I forgot to say, an all-electric new home, that means you're having an efficient heat pump and an efficient heat pump water heater, and you're also using electric induction cooking, or maybe if you want to save a little money, like the Radiant electric, which is not quite as cool as induction, but that's another option. So you're having electric cooking and heating and water heating. Better for the climate, as I already mentioned. And third one is a little more challenging compared to gas, but let's just say we think the new all-electric home or multifamily is going to be about the same cost as a traditional gas furnace and air conditioning setup, and the annual bills are also going to be about the same. So I don't know if it's, in some cases it would be lower, but just to be safe, I would say, for the sake of our conversation today, compared to gas and for multifamily, it's probably about the same cost. Okay, next slide. So with regard to building codes, if you want to consider something to advance all electric buildings, we recently wrote a report, and we give a menu of options. You don't have to just require electric only. That's maybe going too far for some people. So here's our menu, and we recommend at least electric ready, which means that you have the house pre-wired with enough capacity to add the electric heating, space heating, and EV charging at some point. And electric preferred is also a good option. And the city of Boulder has basically adopted that, and it's working very well. Theirs is a very strongly electric preferred, and if you want to install gas, the house has to be super efficient. And then you can see the other choices there, and the last one being electric only. And as you probably know, I forget the number. I think it's up to like 14 cities in California now have a requirement that any new construction, at least in residential, or some cities like Berkeley, it's both residential and commercial, it has to be electric only, no fossil fuels allowed. Next slide. So again, our recommendation is we like electric preferred. It gives some flexibility if people want that. And then at a minimum, if you don't want to go that far, at least we like the electric ready option so that the buildings are pre-wired to have the capacity, as I said. Okay, next slide. And this is just the cover of our report, which you can find on our website, or I can send you the link later if you're interested. And it includes code language for all of those spectrum of options, which you can take the language and, you know, run with it in your own codes. Okay, next slide. Now we're going to talk a little bit about existing buildings. The most cost-effective applications are, first of all, if any homes or multifamily have electric resistance heating, then it's going to be cost-effective to displace some or most of the electric resistance heating with like mini split heat pumps. And then secondly, if the homes have gas heating, you have two options. If they have central air conditioning, the next time that central air conditioner needs to be replaced, you can replace it with a heat pump and offset some of the gas consumption for heating. And if the home has a gas heating but no air conditioning, then you can consider adding some mini split heat pumps to also offer cooling and offset some of the gas heating. So for any of those, utility incentives are going to be helpful. And same for heat pump water heaters. They make sense if you have enough incentives. So we recommend working with El Paso Electric and supporting them in bumping up their incentives for this, and SWEEP will be doing the same thing. So we will be collaborating with you on that, hopefully. And their new plan is coming up in April, their new DSM plan. So it's coming up. And then as I mentioned before, for existing buildings, if you're doing any sort of retrofits, you should always consider starting with making sure that the home is well insulated, seal the leaks, etc. Next slide. Here's a example of a multi-family retrofit. This comes from Utah, and you can see on the left is sort of the before picture, the windows in bad shape, and after is a picture of one of the indoor units of a mini split heat pump system. So in this case, the multi-family housing 28 unit had electric resistance heating, and so they installed ductless heat pumps while upgrading the insulation, installing some LED lighting, and adding some programmable thermostats. So in this case, because they were replacing the electric heating, it ends up being cost effective with a payback of 5 years after the utility rebate. So very successful project. And as I said, it's more challenging if the multifamily property has gas heating, but you know, there are ways to look at it, and with utility help, you know, to sort of make it work. Okay, next slide. And finally, this is my last slide. Just some thoughts about this. I know this is a more complicated issue, but what are you going to do with the gas utility? And so we would suggest, you know, consider hiring a smart consultant to work with you, work with the gas utility, and come up with a strategic plan for the next 10, 15, 20 years. You want to minimize investments in new gas infrastructure if possible. You want to develop a plan for paying off the debt of any of the recent investments, and start to encourage them to do more with weatherization, and perhaps add incentives on top of the El Paso Electric incentives for heat pumps and heat pump water heaters. It's counterintuitive for a gas utility to do that, but since, you know, it's owned by the city, you can get them to do that. And with El Paso's incentives and maybe your incentives on top of that, you could start to make retrofits look better. And some kind of a plan to gradually sell less gas over time, maybe with some goals and rewards for hitting the goals, like something reasonable to start off with, like a 5%, selling 5% gas, 5% less gas over the next 10 years or something like that. Because it takes a while to ramp up these programs, so that doesn't seem like a that's not a very steep goal, and it might be something that they're willing to consider. Yeah. So next slide. I think that's all for my building suggestions, and then Matt's gonna take over and talk about transportation.
Very good.
Right. Great. And I guess we're going to hold the questions till the end, and we'll answer them then during Q&A.
Yes.
Thank you for the great presentation, Neil. So my name is Matt Fromer. I work with Neil at SWEEP. I'm on the transportation team, so I do a lot of work on electric vehicles and also on multimodal transportation. Today I want to talk about accelerating electric transportation in Las Cruces. I've been to New Mexico a couple times, in Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and Taos. Never made it all the way down to Las Cruces, but I did recently learn that my cousin moved there to Las Cruces, so I will be visiting soon. Looking forward to it.
Who's your cousin?
Do you know Kim Schubert?
Oh, no. I just want to make sure it wasn't EFO Philly, our city manager.
It's not. No, my cousin's a hairdresser, so I'm not sure if you know her, but I can connect you. So just to kick this off, I'm going to talk about electric vehicles and why they're important for reducing air pollution and also saving people money. So in terms of climate and cutting carbon emissions, transportation is now the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S. You can see the chart on the right there showing transportation surpassing electricity as the #1 source of carbon emissions in 2016. And those curves have since diverged even further as we replace coal and natural gas power plants with renewables. And then on the transportation side, we're replacing a lot of smaller cars with bigger SUVs and pickup trucks that consume more gasoline and produce more pollution. So we've really got to solve transportation. In addition to the climate benefits, EVs reduce local air pollution. I know New Mexico has some air quality issues and non-attainment for ozone and I think PM10. And of course, EVs have zero tailpipe emissions, so they can be an important tool for improving local air quality and protecting public health. And the third thing is lowering the costs of transportation, which is normally the second most expensive thing in most people's lives. A car runs most households about $9,000 a year. With EVs, though, they're cheaper to fuel, they're cheaper to maintain, and they also, when we plug them into the grid and charge them overnight, they can also put downward pressure on electricity rates by improving grid efficiency. I'll talk about that a little bit. So first, on the fuel cost side, I actually found this tool on El Paso Electric's EV website, where you can input number of miles driven per month. You can input the fuel efficiency of your current vehicle, the price of gasoline now, and then compare it to the fuel costs of driving an electric vehicle. So I put in, this is basically the average new gasoline vehicle replaced by a new Nissan Leaf, which gets about 112 miles per gallon equivalent. And you could see the monthly savings about $72 over a year, about $860. And that really adds up over time. On the maintenance side, there's a report recently from Consumer Reports showing that EV owners spend about half as much to repair and maintain their vehicles as owners of gas-powered vehicles. And then on the right, some good data we have from New York City's fleet. They're kind of early movers on fleet electrification. They've compared the cost of maintaining all-electric vehicles versus plug-in hybrid electrics, hybrids, and then gas vehicles. And I kind of broke it out by averages at the bottom. You can see for all electric, it's around $300 a year in maintenance costs versus gas vehicle, about $1,400 a year. When we add this all up, EVs have a lower total cost of ownership. And this is a graph from Xcel Energy's website comparing the total cost over 5 years of owning a Nissan Leaf versus a Nissan Rogue Sport. You can see the green bar there is the upfront cost of buying the vehicle. It's a little more expensive for the electric. There is a $7,500 federal EV tax credit, so that does bring that cost down. But then over 5 years, you see there's a lower fuel costs, there's lower maintenance costs, and that makes it cheaper to drive an EV compared to a comparable gas vehicle. The other point I want to make is that electric vehicles are coming, and this is becoming more evident every year. Part of it is these national commitments all over the world. So United Kingdom, France, China, and India all making commitments to phase out the sale of fossil fuel vehicles in the next 10 or 20 years. And then more recently, we've had commitments from California, Massachusetts, to ban the sale of fossil fuel vehicles in those states by 2035. In other words, maybe no 100% electric vehicles. There's also 12 or so states that have adopted the zero emission vehicle standard. And we expect New Mexico actually to move forward with that as well, as the governor made that commitment last year. And that puts New Mexico on track to sell more EVs in the state every year, basically adopting the California EV sales standards. And then lastly, on the auto industry side, we're seeing more commitments from the auto industry to transition their fleets to electric vehicles. Got this slide here showing the different automakers. And on the top row there, you could see which have a sales ban for gasoline vehicles. Obviously, Tesla doesn't make gas vehicles, so that's today for them. They're EV only. But then Honda by 2025. And then the big announcement over here was General Motors plans to sell 100% electric vehicles starting in 2035. So they're going to have, I think they said 30 EV models by 2025, and then slowly phase out their gas and other diesel vehicles. So I guess the big question for Las Cruces is, what can local governments do to accelerate EV adoption? And I'll just go through a few things here. The first one is city fleet electrification. So leading by example, walking the walk. Number two is increasing access to EV charging stations by building public charging stations, working with utilities, and then adopting EV-ready building codes. Third, we have EV education and awareness, so educating the community. Fourth, incentives and advocacy for stronger state and federal policies. And then fifth is making the commitment to 100% electric transportation. To start with fleet electrification, so I do most of my work in Colorado, and we did a survey last summer asking local governments here how many EVs they have in their city fleets, and you could see there's over 260 as of last summer. That number now is over 300. And you could see Denver here is really a standout. They've already got 150 electric vehicles in the fleet. Also want to note that it's quite a range, not just sedan EVs, but also crossovers and SUVs. On the right, there's a photo of the Mitsubishi plug-in hybrid electric. So that's got all-wheel drive. It's an SUV, and it's electric. And I know Boulder and Denver each ordered about a dozen of those last year, and they're pretty happy with them. On the bottom there, we've got some operating cost information from Denver. The average cost for fuel and maintenance for a gas vehicle in their fleet is about 28 cents a mile versus just 9 cents a mile for electric. So how does that translate into EV fleet procurement policies? And we've seen about a dozen or so cities and counties in Colorado actually make commitments to electrify their fleets. The most common is to set a target for new procurement. So oftentimes we'll see for sedans and SUVs where electric models are already available today, 100% of new purchases need to be electric starting in 2021. And then for pickups, where we're going to see the first electric pickups in 2022, we're pushing that date to 2023. We've also seen this EV first procurement policy, which basically sets EVs as the default purchase option for departments. And then they basically have to explain, if it's the case, why this EV does not fit either within their budget or for the purposes of that vehicle. but basically prioritizing EVs, making them the default option. In terms of the purchasing decisions, we recommend looking at the total cost of ownership, as I showed before. So not just the purchase price, but also the fuel costs and the maintenance costs over time. And for those cities that do have carbon goals like Las Cruces, we also include the social cost of carbon. So $42, $46 per ton there. And then lastly, committing to build out the EV charging infrastructure to support a new electric fleet in coordination with utilities like El Paso Electric. Next, I want to talk about charging. And it basically, in every survey we've seen, lack of access to charging is the #1 barrier to EV adoption. The reason people don't are unwilling to switch out their gas car for an EV, either they feel like they don't have enough range with the EV and they're going to get stuck on the highway, which almost never happens, or they don't have access to charging at home because they may live in an apartment building or another multifamily housing situation. So what are some strategies to increase access to charging? First, the city can build public charging and also leverage state and utility incentives. New Mexico has allocated, I think, 15% of the Volkswagen settlement for EV charging. And so they're rolling out those programs now to build out level 2 and DC fast charging across the state. And then I know El Paso Electric has also proposed a transportation electrification plan with incentives for charging stations. Second there is to adopt an EV readiness ordinance or update local building codes to require EV infrastructure for parking spaces in new and residential and commercial buildings. So essentially requiring at least the wiring and the conduit between the panel and the parking space so that it's easy for someone to install a charging station if they want to buy an EV. And I added this chart on the right here showing the costs of installing this EV charging infrastructure during new construction, which is the little blue bar, versus doing it during a standalone retrofit later. You can see it's like 5 or 6 times more expensive to do this later during a retrofit than during new construction. So really important to put these in the building code so that we're designing these buildings, we're future-proofing them for EVs. As of now, over 50 cities and counties in the US have adopted these EV-ready building codes, and I included a link at the bottom there to our EV building codes adoption toolkit if you want more information. Next, I want to talk about EV education and awareness because there are a lot of misconceptions around EVs. And I'll just share a little bit of information, the results from a survey we did in Colorado. So more than half of Coloradans don't think they can charge an EV at home with a standard 3-prong electrical outlet. It's true that you can. You can see the photo on the right there. That's a Nissan Leaf plugged into a 240 volt 40 amp outlet, the same one you'd use for a dryer in your home. And that'll give you a level 2 charge where you could fully recharge a vehicle overnight. Some other misconceptions are actually just people being unaware, I guess, of the federal EV tax credit. Only 40% of Americans know that the federal government offers a $7,500 tax credit for the purchase of a new EV. There's this perceived range anxiety, or people think that EVs don't have enough range to cover their daily travel needs. In truth, most people only drive about 30 miles a day, and the average new EV has about 250 miles. So plenty of range there to cover most day to day. And then when you do have sort of a longer road trip, that's what when the fast charging comes in. If you look at plugshare.com, you can see a map of all the fast chargers in New Mexico. Those are like the yellow pins on the map. And there's quite a few. And of course, more in the works as utilities and the state plans to expand that fast charging infrastructure. And then lastly, I just want to highlight that PHEVs are plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. These are vehicles that have both an electric motor and a gas engine. So like a Toyota Prius Prime. So basically you have an electric motor for say 20, 30, 40 miles of range. And then once you've exhausted the battery, it switches over to a gas engine and you can drive it as if it was a gas car. There's another 300 miles of range that way. So for those with extreme range anxiety, the PHEV is a great option. I want to talk about some incentives and advocacy. I mentioned working with El Paso Electric. They have their new transportation electrification plan with EV charging rebates and incentives. Also the VW settlement funds, not only for EV charging, but also that those VW settlement funds are available to replace older diesel and gas buses and trucks with new zero emission vehicle ones. So we've seen some of that funding used for things like electric school buses, electric transit buses, electric airport equipment. There's quite a few different use cases there. For fleet electrification, I'd recommend looking at the Climate Mayors Purchasing Collaborative that basically collected all of these EV procurements in a bulk purchasing program to negotiate lower costs for EVs for city fleets. And then lastly, advocating for stronger state and federal EV policies and incentives. We know the governor's very supportive of climate action, of electric vehicles, and she's announced that she wants New Mexico to join the Clean Cars program. There are other sorts of policies that other states have that New Mexico should be looking at. That is included like the Advanced Clean Trucks Standard to replace the dirty diesel trucks with clean zero emission vehicle ones. And then also looking at some electric vehicle and electric bike incentives. Okay, this next slide is really overwhelming, but I just want to show this chart from a campaign we've got going in Colorado called Go EV City, which is basically working with local governments to make that commitment to 100% electric transportation. And we do that breaking up transportation into these 5 categories. So there's the municipal fleet, transit buses, school buses, taxis, and TNCs, which are transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft. And then the bottom row there is the community-wide EVs. And you can see if Boulder County, for example, their goal is 30% of total vehicle registrations are electric by 2030 and 100% by 2050. Very ambitious goal there. This is something that Las Cruces might look into. You set the goals, and that kind of creates a foundation for other EV supportive policies and programs. That's all I've got. So maybe we'll open it up for questions now for Neil and I. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Looks like we have Councilor Sorg who has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Neil and Matt. I appreciate your coming here. You've given us an excellent summary of what I've been saying for the last 10 years here in Las Cruces. I wish I had your presentation a few years ago. But anyway, what you're saying is exactly right. This is what I've been trying to advocate here in Las Cruces all along. The part about homes and structures in the city, that's a little newer, but I've been talking about electric vehicles now since 2011 or 2012. And so anyway, yeah, I agree that we need to have our homes electric ready, at least electric ready anyway. And the option, a good option to have electric preferred, like you described. But our biggest problem here, and it's always a problem, and I speak from experience here, is the service is not big enough. You got to have, I don't know what the latest standards or codes are for homes, but I bought a house here in Las Cruces that it was built in 1986. It had an 100 amp service. And so it restricts me a lot. I can't have a water heater, and I dare not put a stove in, and of course not a furnace that's all electric. But I did put a whole house air conditioner, and that's just pushed it right to the limit. So these homes have to be at least 200 amp services. There again, I speak from experience. My father was an electrical contractor, wired many houses with him, and he built himself 3 different electric homes in his lifetime, total electric homes. And so when I moved to Montana to the ranch there, I decided I was wanting a total electric home too. Of course, we didn't have natural gas out in the boonies where I lived. but propane was temporarily used in temporary housing, and that I knew for sure I didn't want. So I built myself a total electric home, electric heat, electric water heater, electric range, everything. And I started out with a 200 amp service, and I filled it up. I could barely get anything else in that house that was electric then that used a certain amount of electricity. And so I know where we're coming from here on this. I still struggle with the idea that natural gas is too cheap. It's not competitive with electric for, say, for heating water, except for the one that you mentioned. Now, that's something new that I never heard about before. Could you explain a little bit more how those heat pumps work on a water heater?
How the heat pump water heater works?
Yeah. Do it one more time anyway.
Well, let's see. There is a little video link embedded in that slide, so you can watch that later. But it's basically, you have the heat pump in the top of the water heater, and in this case, it's transferring the heat from the air to a circulating water loop it's heating up the water and going into the tank. So, but it's the same technology. It's using refrigerant, and I don't know what else to say. But they're very efficient, and like I said, it's like 3.5 times as efficient as using electric resistance.
You froze on me.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying that, they're very efficient. It's still using the refrigerant system, and in a nutshell, it basically is just transferring the heat from the air to water.
Okay, I see. That's pretty good. I got myself a whole, with the hotter summers we're having here, I got myself a whole house air conditioning for the house just year before last. And in fact, it's just a little over a year ago now. And I'm just shocked how much electricity that's taken, even though I use ground source heat pump, or geothermal as some people call it, and which of course brings it down. I guess my problem is there's members of my house that like it a little cooler than I think it should be. But moving on to transportation, Matt, thank you so much. I just wonder how many members of our council, and in fact staff, have ever driven a Tesla, maybe by a show of hands. Can you show me if you've driven a Tesla? I don't see any hands going up. It's amazing. A truly amazing car to drive. Oh, there's one. Yeah, Councilor.
No, I haven't driven one. I have been in a Tesla. And
okay, well, you got to drive it to feel real sensation.
I'll salivate too much if I do that. They'll think I'm
okay, that's fine. That's good.
A Tesla.
And I'm not saying the city should buy Teslas. However, Tesla 3 only costs $3,500. And so that's getting into the price range where we could possibly use one in the city here. But I counted 5 other cars that are less than $35,000. And if we could find a way to get that tax credit, pass it on to the dealer, I think there's ways in which we can do that, and so that we could get it even cheaper. There's plenty of cars out there right now we could use then for certain parts of our city fleet, for sure. I like the idea that you described about the local electric vehicle fleet policy in procurement. I hope we can use that here in Las Cruces. That looks like an excellent way of going about this. So anyway, we'll be having the resolution on this, on the transportation part, coming up next council meeting. It's in the schedule. So I'm looking forward to doing some more. So for now, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Abeyta-Stube.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Matt and Neil. I have a few questions, some for you, and I think some for staff too. So I did want to kind of weigh in and get staff's opinion on what the current costs are right now for our vehicles, and if they have already been looking in. And obviously, we're going to see a resolution come forth. So I'm assuming that they have some numbers, perhaps, that they can share with us on the different types of costs associated. And I'm looking for also, we noticed that there was going to be cost reduction for obviously gas, but I'm looking about repairs. And if we have the people that are qualified to make the correct repairs on these types of vehicles, and what those costs look like for individuals and for municipalities.
Okay, so Councilor, okay, Leanne is gonna take the question.
Sure. Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Leanne Demouche, Chief Budget Officer for, as you know, I used to be administrator of fleet several years ago. Actually, Councilor Stube, I probably will need to pull some data to find some accurate recent cost for you. But I will say that typically, our replacement, we try to put in our vehicle acquisition fund about $1.5 million every year for replacement of vehicles. I will tell you, generally, we're probably needing to replace, I would gander to say several hundreds, okay? We do have an older fleet. Right now with the $1.5 million, we give the police department 18 replacements. That includes traffic and police vehicles. It includes detective, it includes codes. And we try to, if we have the funding, for animal control as well. And then with any funding that is left over, we try to provide vehicles for all of the other departments. And unfortunately, it takes probably about maybe they get 1 or 2 vehicles per year. I will say that we try to go out for bonds or for loans for the fire department because their apparatuses, as you know, are very costly. As far as fuel, we probably, I want to say, spend about approximately maybe $2 million a year or a little less per year on that. It's a matter, we just recently went out for a new contract. We have contracts on those, and they give us particular rates. We go by what the rate is for that week with the company that we buy the fuel from, and then they give us a discount, or they either raise the price a few pennies on us. And typically it is usually just a few pennies. As far as maintenance and repair, let's say the total fleet budget is around $6 million per year. So pretty much right now we're actually doing a transfer from the general fund into the fleet services. That's about $3.5 million. It varies. If we have a lot of expenses during the year, we may come back to you closer to the end of the fiscal year and ask for an adjustment there. We're trying not to do that. Actually, the last couple of years, we've been pretty good. So $3.5 million, and then the rest of it comes in. The other, I'd say $2.5 to $3 million comes in from maintenance and repair from those departments that we consider chargebacks. So that's anybody that is an enterprise or an internal or are on a grant. They pay for that. So altogether, our expenses for the year for our fleet is about $6.5 for maintenance and fuel, and then for a replacement, $1.5 million. And what I'll do is I'll pull some reports for you and send it out to all of council for the updated. I'll try to get you the FY 2020 because that's for a full year. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Leanne. And Matt, perhaps could you talk about, if electric vehicles, if it's more expensive to do repairs on those types of cars, and if you need to have qualified personnel, obviously you need to have people that specialize in caring for those types of vehicles too. And how do we rate here in southern New Mexico about having any of those qualified individuals?
Mayor, Councilor Stuvey, I will say I was at Fleet probably about 3 years ago, and we did start looking for electric vehicles. I will tell you that we do have 2 electric hybrids that are in the motor pool. Unfortunately, they are not on charging stations because there are none. Well, there's 2 at City Hall, but I think they mostly use gasoline, unleaded gasoline for those. As far as at the time when I was at Fleet, you have to remember this was 3.5 years ago. I did look into if we had somebody that could work on electric vehicles. And I think at that time, the Ford company, the local Ford dealership had told me that they were getting ready to possibly try to send some of their mechanics out for training for electric vehicles. So I will follow up with our administrator, Richard DeWitt, to get him to reach out to them, which I think he is currently right now. So.
And Councilor, looks like Lisa LaRocca put her hand up, so maybe she has some more information on the maintenance portion or something. Lisa?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Councilor, and to Neil and Matt for the great presentation. I know there is a great challenge with the transition and a couple other options that are available. Another option that is available through the Climate Mayor's program is leasing. And in that context, you are able, the leasing company is able to take advantage of the tax credit and offer the maintenance. So that allows a city fleet to be able to be more exposed to electric vehicles, but not have to have the equipment or training at this juncture to be able to do the maintenance that's required of them. And then at the end of a certain period, like 3 years, we're able to buy those vehicles at a depreciated value. So we're still adding on to our fleet, but starting out with a different scenario where those burdens of maintenance are not on there. And also, you know that we have a Clipper and a Tesla charger at Johnson Park and by the plaza. We're removing those and taking the Clipper chargers and putting them at Fleet, so they will have the capacity to use the electric vehicle charging facilities there, and those would be different than the ones that we're going to be putting in around the city. We're going to have it at 8 different places, and those will be electric chargers, dual electric chargers level 2, that we will collect funds for that are related to the EV charging or the EV rates that El Paso Electric is going to set.
Great, thank you. And I appreciate that. And I know, Matt, you had yourself unmuted right at the beginning, so I do want to let you have a little bit of time if you had anything additional to add.
I'll just be quick. Yeah, so thank you, Lisa. She sent me over some information earlier about how many EVs you have in the fleet. It looks like there's 3 Ford C-Max EVs. I just wanted to point out that the technology has come a long way in the last few years. Like I think they've discontinued production of the C-Max. But just to demonstrate, like the Nissan Leaf in 2017 got like 85 to 100 miles of range. The newer ones today are about 230. And then they're improving on that each year to getting into the 300s. So I just wanted to point out that, the sort of like first generation EVs had really limited range and more issues being such a new technology. But just like with solar panels, we've seen them become cheaper, more efficient, higher performance over time. And so the new ones are a lot better. What I was going to suggest is maybe connecting with the Nissan dealership in Las Cruces and asking whether you could borrow a Leaf for a month or two and see what that's like. I know we've had some success that way in Colorado with the Nissan dealerships here. About a third of the cars on lot in the Colorado Nissan dealerships are electric, a lot of Leafs. So they've got all the staff on hand. They are experienced with the repairs and maintenance. And I know the same is true for Chevy with their Bolt as well.
Great, thank you. And then moving on to homes, I'm wondering, and forgive me if I can't remember exactly, did we have any specific measurable goals within our Elevate plan about any electric changes that we'd like to see at all? Or is this all items that will be new for us to look at? And that'll be for staff probably. And I'm not sure, Lisa, might you know?
Counselor, what was your question again? I'm sorry.
If we have any measures already located within Elevate Las Cruces on electric homes, or any sort of measures that we were going to look at within Elevate.
When you say measures, can you expand on that specifically? Like,
If we mentioned it anywhere within Elevate Las Cruces.
okay.
Actions, codes.
Actions codes, if we put in anything, or there's going to be new conversations that we need to start with our home builders associations and everything.
Yeah, we talked about renewable energy. We talked about, of course, the numbers that was discussed as far as where we want to go in so many years, but I don't think we zeroed it down into specifically homes. But I don't know. I don't know if Lisa is aware of that or.
Yes, Mayor, councilors, there are some mentions about increasing energy efficiency and updating the codes that relate to it in Elevate. There's also a new state standard, which is the International Energy Efficiency codes, which are stricter, and the city will by association, by being part of the state, will be adopting those. So in that context, that is also at play. And the climate action plan specifically talks about energy efficiency, especially targeted for low and moderate income communities to reduce their cost burden. So all those areas are already in policy.
Great, thank you, Lisa. And that'll be all my questions for now.
Thank you, Councilor Bencomo. No, wait a minute. Yes, Bencomo. I think. Yeah, well, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I thought I had seen Councilor Vasquez's hand.
He did, and for some reason, the line up here is different than what I have down here. So, Councilor Vasquez, if
I'll defer to Councilor Bencomo. That's fine. I can go after her.
okay. I figured you'd do that.
Thank you. And thank you very much for this important conversation we're having today and the presentation. Yeah, I just have a couple questions, and then I just wanted to make some statements that I think are important for this discussion. And I think my questions may be for staff as well, or at least my first one. I'm curious about, I know that there is a weatherization assistance program in New Mexico. I'm curious about the kind of funds that come to Las Cruces to support low-income families in weatherizing their homes, and how we can increase that assistance to homeowners or even renters in Las Cruces. I don't know, maybe Lisa?
Mayor, Councilor Bencomo, I'm sure that Natalie's group can also address this, but there are different programs that are out there to address weatherization, and El Paso Electric has a rebate program. The problem is with this is that there's not a comprehensive program or funding sources. So there's gaps in a lot of different things. Like you'll qualify for one thing if you have air conditioning, but not if you have an evaporative cooler and different things like that. So reading between the lines of your question is that there is a strong need to scale up this work. I think everyone is doing a great job, but it's difficult to coordinate all these efforts because there is so much to do, and that is becoming a priority now for a lot of different groups to come together and figure out how to stack or complement each other's work. So that's being done. El Paso Electric has reached out to us. Sweeps state representative is talking with us. So in that context, we are hoping to accelerate the amount of weatherization that goes on, and with the end goal of having the cost burdens be reduced for everyone.
Right. Thanks, Lisa, for that. I knew you'd know. I mean, I think I'm glad you mentioned that. And I mean, I think this is honestly one of those, like, not necessarily easy, but this is a very clear next step that I think we could take as a city. And so supporting these kinds of efforts are important. So I'd for sure support something like that if it came across city council. Lisa, or anybody, actually, any of our presenters, I'm curious with this new administration at the federal level, if we expect to see major efforts to support state and local governments with funding to do some of these major, bold initiatives, like I said, at the local level. Are we expecting to see any of that?
I hope so.
Yeah. Do you know if so? Is there nothing necessarily that has been put out yet?
I mean,
No.
yeah,
Go ahead, Matt.
I would just say it's early days for sure. I think one thing we could probably expect from the federal government is some sort of zero emission vehicle standard like we have at the state level, in addition to the current CAFE standards for gas vehicle fuel efficiency. So, and then also significant investment in R&D for electric vehicles and batteries. I know the Biden administration also has a goal of building 500,000 EV fast charging stations across the country. So funding that effort. And then the other thing I would say is that they've done a nice job centering environmental justice and equity early on. There's this new Justice 40 initiative where they plan to direct, I think, 40% of federal climate investments toward low income or disproportionately impacted communities. And so that's certainly a big shift from what we've seen the past 4 years, and some exciting stuff on the horizon, though we don't have too many details yet.
Okay, that was Matt Fromer speaking. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Sorry.
Thanks, Mayor.
Okay.
Yeah, I was reading yesterday that our new Secretary of Transportation also has very big goals in terms of climate change and transportation. And so, one of my questions was going to be around moving city transportation to 100% electric. Is probably very costly and expensive. And so I'm hoping that there are resources from the federal government to be able to do that, especially when, I don't want that burden of cost to land on the consumer, right? To land on our citizens. And, I've mentioned to this council before and in our TSI PRC that, I would really like to see the city provide no cost public transportation to Las Cruces residents. And so I certainly, as we make that shift to electric public transportation, I don't want, like I said, that cost of burden to fall back on the consumer. I don't know if, Matt, if you all had any suggestions in terms of any of that or what you've seen in other cities.
Yeah, I'd say in terms of bus electrification, I would look into the VW settlement funds that the state is administering. So they have, I don't know what New Mexico's portion is, but it was whatever portion of the Volkswagen diesel emissions scandal took place in New Mexico. So say 20 or $30 million. But you can use some of that funding to replace old diesel buses with new electric ones. And I think Albuquerque's taking advantage of that. And I thought Lisa mentioned that Las Cruces might be as well. 5 electric buses, if I'm right.
Yes,
That's
I think
right.
that's right.
Yeah, that is awesome. Great news. And I would work with El Paso Electric to figure out the charging infrastructure on that as well, since they're
It's
starting
being
off with
done.
some incentives. Cool. Great news. And then I also just saw this morning that in Biden's next COVID relief bill, he's got $30 billion for transit to try to rescue transit from what's been, the impacts of COVID. So that's a positive step.
Yes, thank you, Matt. And Mr. Mayor, I see Lisa's hand is up again, so I don't know if she has something else to add.
Lisa LaRock?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Councilor Bencomo. I just wanted to add that on a state level, right now, they're trying, the legislators are trying to update the sustainable building tax credit, which gives tax credits for heat pumps, for all of those different things that Neil just presented. And for low and moderate income households, the tax credit is double, and they get it as a check and not as a deduction on their income taxes. So there are some very innovative ways that they're trying to encourage people to be able to switch over.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. Those were all my questions. I think, lastly, I just wanted to name that I'm really glad we're having this conversation, and we'll continue to, because although I believe strongly that each of us has an important role to play in curbing the effects of climate change, I think individuals statistically are blameless for climate change. And, I think governments and industry particularly have very key role to play actually in the way that we're going to see climate change sort of come to be in the next few decades. And I think one of the biggest things we can do as a municipal government is really advocate for policies that hold extractive industries accountable for the kind of impacts that we are seeing already across the country and the world. More and more we're going to start seeing climate migration, right? Immigrants who leave their home countries because of severe climate. And so I just think these things are really heavy. And again, as we should do as much as possible as local government, definitely. And we shouldn't only push for policies that change individual behavior, even though it's important. It's not necessarily going to change. This isn't going to change by individual actions alone. So thank you, Councilor Sorg, for bringing this to the conversation.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilor.
Could explain to Councilor Bencomo, she brings up excellent points. I just have some good news. The bill that Lisa LaRock was saying is House Bill 15. Follow that through the legislature. Hopefully it'll pass. That gives credits for home building that is environmental. And we are really close to all these things we've been talking about here today. That's not that far away. It's not that big of a shift in our paradigm here. The costs for electric vehicles, the costs for electrifying houses will be coming down as time goes on, just like the cost of computers went down, just like the cost of solar PV went down. It's all coming down and being very competitive.
I agree. Okay, is that it, Councilor Bencomo? Yes, so. Yeah, okay. Councilor Vasquez?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councilor Bencomo, for your comments. Completely agree with you on all points there, and Councilor Sorg for bringing this forward and continuing to make this an important issue for us to discuss and move forward on, as well as to Matt and Neil for your presentation. I think Matt and Neil, you're talking to, I think, a pretty supportive council on this effort. And I think we are hungry and looking for solutions to move forward in this direction. And so in particular, the policy suggestions that you have talked about are things that I don't want us to forget about after this work session. I know, Councilor Sorg, you mentioned a resolution coming forward that might include several components of this, but I think there were some really important ones included in this presentation, like the first option piece about buying new electric vehicles in our fleet and having that be the default, right? And being able to look at, budgetarily with the savings and with our current age of our fleet, what that would cost over the long run if it's a policy that we wanted to implement this year, right? I think it'd be great for staff to work on an analysis of, as our gas fleet starts to age out, right? So not getting rid of our gas cars necessarily, but every time we buy a new one, what the life of that fleet looks like and what the cost would be to the city that's a proposal I'd like to see so that we could implement potentially that particular policy. And I think that's us getting really, serious about this. And just have another question too, as it relates to our gas utility. I know there's not many municipalities out there that have their own gas utility. I think we're pretty unique in that sense, from my understanding. But I know our gas utility is one of the, it brings in a lot of money to really power all of our collective enterprise funds as part of our utilities department. And so I don't know if Ms. Walsh is on or someone else, but I'm wondering, or some of our utilities commissioners that are on as well, considering that we just funded this big natural gas project out in Talavera, and we're trying to add customers as it stands to our gas utility. What are the conversations in our utilities department around the future of that utility, and perhaps eventually being able to, I don't know if the plan would be to sell it to the private sector or to continue managing it and phasing it out, but wondering if anyone from our utilities department or administration has any thoughts on what the phasing away of a gas utility might look like.
Well, I see that Delilah is on the meeting, but I don't know if she has information to discuss it just yet.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry. I was trying to raise my hand and I couldn't get to that fast enough.
Oh, no problem.
Screen's going on, but that is, our energy transition is a commitment that the council made through our climate action plan. And that was decarbonization of our natural gas and, looking at a true energy transition plan for the city of Las Cruces. So that line or that effort will actually be included in the resolution that Councilor Sorg has requested. So I've actually come up with a draft, and that will hopefully, as I get interrupted throughout the day, I'll have that draft ready to send to Lisa so we can work with her on moving that forward. But regarding the natural gas utility as a business, it's really something that we want to plan well, because we do have one of the more affordable utilities in the Southwest. It's very well run, very efficient, and it does provide a big boost to the operations of water and wastewater and even solid waste. So I'll give you an example. The natural gas utility right now pays over 35% of shared services. So that means it's paying for our billers, our customer service reps, our accountants, franchise fees to the city, administrative fees to the city. It pays over 35% of that chunk in administrative fees. So that means we'll have to raise rates over all other utilities if it doesn't exist in order to absorb those expenses, because those are fixed costs that will exist no matter what our customer size. The other part of it is that we have to make sure we don't burden the affordability of energy to our existing customers. So for example, if you were to force full electrification throughout the entire city, which is not at all what was being proposed today. It was talking about being electric ready and being ready for renewables. But if you don't have those renewables in place, you can actually cause a regressive tax to your lower income and middle income families. And so that's another consideration. Also, if we were to sell off the utility, for example, in today's world, we have control over the rates and those energy costs for our citizens. And I, for one, don't want to let go of that control, because we've been very responsible. For 85 years, we've managed that at a responsible manner and affordability for our citizens. So I don't want to hand over to a private investor who may or may not share the same climate action goals that we have as an organization. So that's another consideration. And then lastly, we don't want to harm our industrial opportunities within the city. So we've got large users such as NASA, NMSU, even our latest land, Big Tuna that came through economic development, they need gas in order to do what they're doing. So again, it just has to be a reasonable plan. And that's what we're looking for. It's the planning part of it. So those are questions we're asking. As a matter of fact, at our next board meeting for LCU, we actually have added an energy transition slide to start having those discussions with our board. So I like what Councilor Sorg recommended in December, is let's put a concrete plan together. Let's look at that 30-year outlook of the what ifs and what can happen without harming the affordability to our citizens or even the operations of our city. So it is a lot to think about, but yes, to answer your question in a very long, broad way, that is something we are looking at and considering.
Thank you, Ms. Walsh. That's a really thoughtful answer, and I'm so glad to hear that there's so much work already going into thinking about this in a way that really, as you said, protects the consumer. I think that's, at that moment where we can actually level out cost to consumer and actually, transitioning away from perhaps what we're purchasing now in terms of the volumes of gas that we're acquiring, and more folks have access to this, not just in new homes, but there's that social justice piece of like making sure that it's not just brand new homes that have great electric power, but that we're able to retrofit existing homes as well. I think we talk about that with solar quite a bit in the city, and so we've been pushing for community solar so that we can, get more folks on a shared grid as a solution. And so those are all, really good considerations. Thanks again, Councilor Sorg, for thinking about that. I do have just one other question or maybe a comment. I don't know if folks will be able to answer this, but I know El Paso Electric, currently has several coal-fired plants. And so there's just this, as many electric utilities still do. And so there's this dynamic about, continuing to rely on electricity that is still being produced by fossil fuels. And so that, even though we don't have the individual, perhaps, emitters, right, in a bus or a car, those fossil fuels are still being extracted to power the very electric vehicles. And so I wonder if Neil or Matt, if you have any thoughts on that, especially in working with the utilities, if they have their own transition plans to get off of coal-fired plants and then actually get grids with the renewable energy that we are all wanting to switch to anyway. So just, any thoughts on that, Neil or Matt?
Yeah, this is Neil. By the way, Matt had to leave to go to another meeting, but if anybody has any more questions for Matt, I can share his email address. I think it's on the last slide, but anyway, I don't know specifically what El Paso Electric is thinking, but I did share that there is the energy, what's it called? The act that was passed in the last couple of years that does require all the New Mexico utilities to have a plan to go to 50% renewables by 2030. And so that's a pretty aggressive goal, and they have to hit that. So they will be working on phasing out their coal plants. I know that in Colorado, even the Tri-State, which owns, runs a lot of, provides power to the co-ops in New Mexico as well. Tri-State now has a plan to go to 80% reduction in its emissions by 2030, which is very aggressive. And it's because, as you probably have heard, renewables are just becoming so cost effective, and even compared to the cost of operating an existing coal plant, in some cases, it just makes sense to shut the coal plant down and go ahead and transition to wind and solar. So it's happening, and I don't know that we usually SWEEP usually focuses more on the energy efficiency and clean transportation, but there are a number of environmental groups that are working with clean energy plans of utilities and trying to get them to speed up that transition. So that's all I know. I can't really say anything more than that.
And looks like Delilah has another comment or question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry for the record, Delilah Walsh, Utilities Director. And to sort of speak to what Councilor Vasquez has said, we also want to be careful that we don't go to electrification only for the sake of electrification, because just as you said, EPE will have to do something to generate that new service and generate that extra electricity. And in today's world, they have to burn 3 times as much gas to produce the same amount of energy as if you were to light your stove. So if I turn on my gas fireplace, if that were an electric fireplace, they have to burn 3 times more natural gas to give me that electricity. So we want to make sure our electrification really is focused on the renewable component.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Delilah. I'll just finish by saying that I'm definitely supportive. Thank you again, Councilor Sorg. And let's figure out, what local, both the administrative policies and resolutions, and in the future ordinances we need to enact to start getting here. And I see this part of a much bigger effort on the city's part. We've been talking about, the ban of single-use plastics in our TSI committee as well. And so there's a whole bunch of different things that go into creating a more sustainable, healthy, clean environment for everybody. But this is certainly a big part. And as Councilor Bencomo mentioned, one of the biggest things we can do as a city to really have a majority impact, a large impact here. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Councilor. Looks like Mayor Pro Tem. And then I guess Councilor Sorg, if he has another, and Councilor Flores, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mayor and Neil, and now see, I've already forgotten your partner's name. Thanks so much for a really thoughtful presentation. Thank you, Councilor Sorg, for really pushing to bring this forward. Been really proud of our sustainability, our policies within that. It's really not in my wheelhouse, but learning very quickly. We all know the importance. I guess I'm wanting to see what policies or ordinances are currently in the queue from sustainability PRC, with the exception of the banning the plastic waste, but related to some of those, what I say is low-hanging fruit, those policies that the development, of new development have this, where we're very much encouraging or we want to have them wired to move into that arena. I mean, where are we at with that? And I know Councilor Abitastuvi asked if it's sitting in our, is it mentioned in our Elevate? And I know I couldn't point to it. I was trying to pull my Elevate quickly to see if I could find it. But just wanting to see how, what sort of timeframes. I'm hearing a lot of cool things happening, but we should probably get some timeframes together where we're developing these ordinances, so we see by the end of the year that not only plans from utilities, but plans from from Lisa and others are in the queue and ready for us to move forward with.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem, I was going to say something to that towards the end, but since you brought it up, let me just suggest this. I think one of the first steps we need to do is, and we probably need to give our home builders at least a year advance notice, is that perhaps in about a year, we're going to start requiring that new home constructions have at least wired for that type of electricity. If they were to have an electric car, they don't have to have the home rewired, or they don't have to have the home remodified. And that's also good because as new subdivisions come in, El Paso Electric has to need to know what the new load will be, because they have to be able to provide that. So I think that would be, if we were to maybe signal that in about a year or so, we're going to be looking at this resolution that requires new home construction to have those type of amenities for those type of electric vehicles. And I'm thinking, the ones that look like a big, huge plug, that plugs into the car. And I know that you can use the current electricity, but it takes forever to do it. And so it'll take a different type of add-on. And I think that's good thinking on our part to maybe look at doing something down the road. But I don't believe, I'm almost certain we have nothing on the books yet. And that's something there that probably Larry Nichols and his team can start looking into, and then we can bring something forward.
I know we don't have it in the books, Mayor, but I'm more about in the queue, like in some of these sustainability PRCs, and hearing from Delilah, I'm happy that it'll be a standing agenda item for utilities to be discussing. And I've been hearing since Dr. Garcia was on board that, they're having these discussions and probably looking to hiring a contractor or consultant, right, to come in. And I guess I'm trying to say, I've been hearing about it, but where are we at? And I know I'm sensing there's some major concern about moving out of the natural gas and into that, and rightfully so because of the load, right? She just said it 30%, that's her accountants and other folks, right? And so we have to think very thoughtfully, empathetically about training people, retraining people, right, to do something different. So I just want to know that we're being succinct, and that there's some deadlines, that we're placing accountability for each other on council, because I know we've been talking about this for some time. So, and I'm hearing all that, and I want to be sensitive to staff and El Paso Electric, our housing, our Home Builders Association, to all, but lots of people have been participating in that Elevate. They knew this was coming, right? So I like that time frame, Mayor, within a year, and I'm happy with that, because then we know that we're putting ourselves, okay, this is the time frame. Something has to be done moving forward.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And if I may add, there's another, and I appreciate Neil's presentation, because he gave us a spectrum of building code options, and I also like where and this is a good compromise until we, a good step forward. Electric preferred. It says
yes,
extra energy or renewable requirements for new construction with natural gas. So if they still have that natural gas, it's got to be like really, really energy efficient. And so that gives the homeowner a little bit more like, okay, if they're going to upgrade it to, so it's that energy efficient, then they have that natural gas.
So Mayor, with that, great points. I feel like for our underserved, for our folks that are in poverty, that's hugely unattainable, right? And I think about our Section 8 housing, right?
Yeah, this is new construction, not expecting our current houses to be retrofitted to that. That'd be very difficult to do. I mean, it'd be nice to have those grants and available, because that'll save them money if we can do that. But I'm talking about new construction. I'm sorry. I guess I misunderstood you. I thought you were talking about.
No. I know there's that part, but then I'm saying my next section of questions is going to be around what do we do for those folks, right? That's hugely unattainable. And so I'm thinking about what's currently happening with our Section 8. They're in the process of determining, they will do a total reconstruct of their housing stock. And so if that happens, Mayor, are we able to, as a locality, to do an incentive where we help them, right, to be able to get to that point, not just preferred, but I see that as new build? Or is it? Not sure, but how can we be able to put some incentives together, or does that have to come from the state per se?
Probably whoever can give out the incentives, but let's see. Delilah has her hand up, so.
So, Mr. Mayor, thank you again, and Councilor Yandra, again, Delilah Walsh for the record, Utilities Director. I love the question you asked, Councilor, because we have an answer from the utility. We have been talking about it and working on it. Actually, as part, and you don't know this because we're still going through the UCAG process, but as part of our latest rate review on the gas rate review, remember, we still have to take care of this infrastructure. We still have to make sure it's safe, it's reliable, and it's affordable. That's our ultimate goal. But as part of this latest rate review process, we've actually asked our consultant to add in a decarbonization rider or an environmental rider. So we have a source, or at least a funding source, where we can fund such incentive programs, or maybe we have energy efficiency programs that we offer, and do that through this decarbonization rider where we're lowering the use of natural gas, or we're helping with energy efficiency to other lower income housing projects or individuals. So that's one possibility that we've been talking about. And that's actually going to be coming to you as part of our rates when we come to council. So we've added a decarbonization rider. In addition to that, Technical Services Deputy Director Carl Clark has already been working to identify consultants who can help us with a transition plan, as well as an energy plan. And then as part of our changes and updates in our strategic business plan, I don't know if you know as council, but we've been notified as departments that it's time to update our plans. We'll be going to the utilities board to add energy transition as one of our identified, not missions, but issues, one of our issue statements of how we're going to put energy transition and efficiency and that consideration within our strategic business plan. So we have been talking a lot, but this month we're actually making quite a bit of movement. So I just wanted to let you know that those things are coming. And you know, I know I said this a lot during our climate action plan work groups, but I'm all about affordability and lower income individuals to make sure we're always addressing that part of our citizen and our group here in Las. I come from a very poor community, and I know what that's like. And I really, that's a big focus for me, just as an individual and a leader of the utility.
I'm so glad to hear that, Delilah, that our low income folks are not being forgotten and dropped. As when we start talking about this, like the affordability, there's no way, right, that they would be able to afford that. And so I'm glad, Delilah, you mentioned it.
I don't mean to interrupt, but it looks like Assistant Manager Enriquez had his hand up. Maybe wanted to add to the conversation.
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem Gondara. Thank you for your questions. Larry Nichols, unfortunately, is not able to get on. He's having some technical difficulties, but I know that the International Code Council, the state has just approved or mandated that we also adopt the energy code through the International Code Council. So those are some of the things that we'll be working on with the Home Builders Association. We would hope to see incentives on the federal level, no different than some of the things that we've seen with solar panels and solar energy. But this is fairly new with the Code Council, and this is again a great opportunity that we'll pursue. And hopefully with new bills, we'll have that in the code, and then any retrofits that may come later on. So we are moving in that direction. I also wanted to mention another staff member that was having difficulties getting on is Mike Bartholomew with transit, that we do have 5 electric buses under the RFP right now, and they should hopefully, if everything goes right, by September of 2022, have those on board, with the stations being built and also the maintenance and repair issues corrected or addressed at that time. Just wanted to share that. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and Delilah, the decarbonization rider, what would that consist of? I guess I'm not I'm not a financial person, so I can do my own personal checkbook, but what does that entail?
Yes, Councilor Gondara, Mr. Mayor, Delilah Walsh, Utilities Director. Essentially what would happen is, let's say we have a goal of $500,000 that we want to collect for an energy efficiency program or maybe an incentive program. That would translate to about 19 cents per customer. So that rider would appear on your utility bill. So I just happen to know, after what our people have done, that about 19 cents per customer would lead to about $500,000 to have those programs and support those programs. So as we set those goals, you must have an actual target and an actual project. You can't just say, I'm going to collect 20 cents and do with whatever with it. You actually have to have projects in mind and targets in mind, and then you can add that rider to a bill, to a gas bill.
Now that's in addition to everything else we're charging them.
Correct. So you're going to pay for your cost of gas, and then as far as our rates, which you all will approve for delivery of those services and maintenance of the system, plus the rider is usually a flat cost, meaning we're only going to charge 20 cents per customer or 8 cents per customer, and that money specifically goes to identify projects.
Okay. that helps me. Thank you so much. And Mayor, lastly, our part as a city, right? I know that and hearing Leanne and sort of all the barriers there is in regarding to our old fleet and moving forward, hearing that we have a couple of electric vehicles, but they just run specific on gas. I just, it's like, why have an electric vehicle, right? So how do we move into ensuring that that is being utilized effectively? And the only way that I see that is coming up with a fleet plan, right? Having an understanding that every year we're going to say we're going to purchase these many electric vehicles, trucks, and all small cars, those kinds of things, and just keep increasing that moving forward. And I don't know that there is one. But I'd really like, my recommendation would be is to do that. And then, Mayor, I think we can do a lot to reduce our waste here, from plastic cups and styrofoam cups and plastic forks, utensils, those kinds of things, the things that that we're using internally. I know that when we were meeting in City Hall, and we wanted to go and get a cup of coffee, there were styrofoam, just things like that I think we could really make a dent in, right? Just really moving very, very slowly out of some of these, wasteful products that don't do anything for our environment. And with that, Mayor, thank you. I appreciate the information, and I really look forward to seeing all the change that is coming about. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. So let me just talk a little bit about what you just mentioned. And I have to admit, I like Councilor Vasquez's idea. One of the things that, of course, we're going to be looking at is when Leanne comes back with the amount that we spend in maintenance and regarding the vehicles, and then, of course, the replacement vehicles. And I think that we're going to, just like anything else, so if we spend $2,500 a year per vehicle, what is the life of a vehicle, of electric vehicle? I don't know, 15 years, 10 years, I have no idea. So that will give us an opportunity to figure out that's how much we're going to spend, because we'll be able to save the money we save in maintenance and fuel. And then, of course, the thing that what Lisa talked about, the leasing, that's another option. If that's all we have to do is just cover the leasing, does that lease payment, does the money that we spend on gas cover that lease payment? If it does, that's great. Then we can move forward with that. But if it doesn't, I think Councilor Vasquez's idea about maybe like anything else, when we're going to start replacing vehicles, maybe just slowly integrate our fleet a little bit at a time. But I mean, sometimes we buy 20, 30, 40 vehicles at a time. And so that's a nice little thing to get started with, and the electric vehicles as well. So I think that's good. I think on your plastic forks and such, I think we were moving in that direction until the pandemic hit. And especially for the restaurants and stuff, I don't know if you want to mandate that they can't be using that, because they're going to have to start washing a lot of plastics. I mean, washing a lot of metal, silverware and stuff. But I think we still need to keep that on the forefront.
Talking within the city, Mayor, within our own city structure.
Oh, well,
I'm not talking. I mean, I know those policies are coming for plastics, right? Banning plastics, but I'm talking about within our own city structure, really looking at our usage of plastics and those types of things, styrofoam, and moving away from doing that. I mean, I think we have a lot of control within our city, and that's one of the things I'd like to see happen.
EFO can do that in overnight.
Yeah.
You're saying just do away with all plastic forks and go right to metal forks? Yeah, I don't see why not. We did that with the water bottles. Remember when we just said we're just going to think out of, that's how we got the water fountains and just fill up our
You and
water
I were
bottles.
the only ones on the council.
Oh,
Mayor,
they don't remember
that water bottle thing did.
Oh, you're
We
right.
lost it.
Okay, that's
a good idea. Great.
well, I still think,
Absolutely.
I don't know, I think that it just happened a few years ago, but gosh, I guess it happened a long time ago, 10 years. Yeah, so.
All the years just sort of
They just
blend
kind
in, right, Mayor?
Yeah, they do.
I remember Councilor Pedrosa is the one that
Oh, yeah. Maybe I was
suggested it's
just newly elected, or I don't remember. But Mayor, I do want to say that my commitment, I know Councilor Vasquez and I sit on the South Central Solid Waste Authority, as you do. This next year, we'll be talking a lot about recycling plants, what we do, right, just because of the issues we've had. With our contractor. So I know that we have prioritized, at least in talking with Executive Director Peck, that it was something that we would be looking into moving forward. So,
but but getting back to the things that you want to do away with, it'd be nice to maybe just take a look at it and hold off and see where exactly how this fits in with the pandemic. Because, if we start going back to, handing people cups of water right now, instead of just giving them a bottle just different things. I guess what I'm trying to say is just probably let management take a look at it, see what they can implement out right now. So, okay. Councilor Flores, and then I guess Councilor Sorg, if you have a follow-up question. Okay, Councilor Flores.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Neil and Matt, for your presentation. SWEEP seems to be doing a fantastic job. If you've covered 9 or 10 states throughout the Southwest, including Wyoming. Thank you for your presentation and for making sure that all our resolutions lead into perhaps ordinances. And thank you also to my colleagues and Mayor for your insights and your vision. As far as Councilor Abeyta-Stuvey's question regarding what it led me to think was, what are we really doing and how are we going to make sure that all of this happens? And I know as Mayor Pro Tem Gandara mentioned, it'd be great if a lot of the builders get a heads up on this. And you mentioned, Mayor, that they need about a year. But prior to that, and I have my big question, because usually I think it happens to all of us, you have a question and then you get so involved with everybody's questions and answers that you forget what your own question is. But just to be on the safe side, because Councilor Abeyta-Stuvey asked about whether all of this was in Elevate Las Cruces. And yes, everything that we're covering now, there's the CE, the C this, and the C that sections that you go into. And so all of it is covered, it's woven into that. Most of our PRCs are driven by that. And I think that our health PRC, which is chaired by Councilor Abeyta-Stuvey, and our housing PRC, which is chaired by Councilor Ioannis Bencomo. Both of those, we can work, we can discuss resolutions regarding those respective areas. It's all tied in. It's all like a beautiful tapestry of having a good life. The quality of life is throughout and greatly improved. But what I would like to ask of staff, Mayor, you said that some of our codes are in place already. I don't know. What I would ask of staff, be it legal, be it community development, be it whoever, maybe Christopher Dunn also, to review our codes to see how it relates to our goals that we've discussed here. And I haven't seen the resolution that was drafted by Councilor Sorg, or presumably finished by, or whatever, fully drafted by Mr. Dunn. But we need to make sure that all of our new buildings, and we have a lot of development out in the East Mesa, homes are popping up every day, to make sure that all the codes are in place. And if it's going to take a year understandably, the builders have to transition into this to make sure, because it would really be a great service to a new home buyer to get into a green home, to get everything going. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, if I had to do that in my house, I mean, it would be a chunk of change. And so hopefully there'll be some incentives for those of us who own older homes. So can I ask that here, Mr. Peely, Mr. Mayor, of all staff to please review their codes, especially buildings. Mr. Nichols apparently isn't online right now. But as it relates to building requirements, especially, and for our building of homes and any other edifices that are going up throughout the city, be they new developments, be they infill projects, just everywhere throughout the city. I think we need to make sure that our codes are making it an ordinance to do this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Sorg.
I didn't know. I got surprised that Councilor Flores finished that now. And I've been listening to a lot of the comments that the councilors have made, and I think I can add some good information, good insights as to what this is all about. But I would like to start out with if Mr. Kolwey or Neil, if you could put up the slide that has the comparing of the costs of an electric vehicle with a internal combustion engine vehicle. There is something there that I think we might have missed that I think is really important. Councilor Abeyta-Stuvey was asking about maintenance, and it was clear on that slide. Can you do that?
I could do that if you give me a second. I need to stall. I need a 30-second timeout while I find, because Matt didn't. I need to just pull up the presentation and then share it. Just give me 30 seconds.
Yeah, just tell me when you're ready, because I wanted to also mention that the departments in Las Cruces here make their choices for buying new vehicles, replacement vehicles. And I would just like to have this resolution supersede what they, or be a part of their decision making when they decide on a vehicle. And so that needs to be in the part of the resolution, part of what the process for procurement. The fact that we have an older fleet, this is a great opportunity to replace those vehicles with something that's more environmentally sound. And then I wanted to ask everybody if you saw the General Motors Super Bowl commercial yesterday. It was all about their electric vehicle fleet that they're going to bring out online. It was quite a commercial. And it's all about the education that we talked about earlier too. People need to be understanding that, not to be afraid of electric vehicles. In fact, once you drive them, as I said, I did once, you will have some enjoyable pleasure. The only thing you're going to miss is noise. And for that, you may want to go someplace and do something else for noise. Is this it? Yes.
Is this the one you were looking for?
Yes, that's it. Where you look closely at the different colors, the cost of the vehicles first there with the V, and then you have the electricity used, which is in the kind of maroon color, reddish color. And then the M there is the maintenance. Notice how much bigger the maintenance is for the gas car compared to the electric vehicle. And then finally, the insurance. Do you know, Neil, whether the insurance is different on an electric vehicle than it is on a gas car?
That is a good question. It looks like it's about the same here, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I would have to ask Matt that.
Yeah, well, for the meantime, let's say it's the same.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the gasoline there, a large chunk with G there, it's gray. So comparing the G with the E, There's where your biggest savings is, but also savings in maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
I would say half the maintenance of a gasoline vehicle and electric vehicle would have. So that's where your big savings is going to be on this. And then I have one last thing about natural gas. We all need to understand something about natural gas. We're not going to get rid of it completely. There's going to be there are other uses for natural gas besides heating and cooking. And for example, we make fertilizer out of natural gas, and that fertilizer goes to grow our crops and food and so forth. So that's a big use of it. So natural gas is always going to be around. There's going to be other smaller uses of natural gas too. And the point is that what we need to do is try to substitute natural electricity for natural gas where we can, where it makes economic sense. And of course, all the time, not letting it cause any more inequity. In fact, if we can make it cause more equality, that'd be better. Okay, Mayor, I think, the rider, just so we understand what the rider is that Ms. Walsh was talking about, those funds that come from a rider, as she kind of hinted at, they can provide low-income homes for more efficiency for using of their energy, so saving them money in the long run. It's just like our water cost in not Las Cruces so much, and in fact, not at all. What they'll do is charge more for water, but then you can use that money to buy low flow fixtures and other water conservation devices. So it subsidizes the cost of those things. Okay, I think that covers everything. Oh, one more thing. There is an organization called, and you guys took it away from me on my screen, called the Center for Climate Integrity. And they're all about climate accountability. And what primarily they are going after the big climate countries, big climate corporations that are responsible for our climate and global warming. So there's a pretty good size effort to do that in the country. Okay, Mayor, I think I've said everything I need to say now, unless somebody talks about something else.
Well, unfortunately, Neil had to jump off. He didn't think it was going to go this long. He doesn't know you guys. So, anyways, he appreciated the opportunity to discuss this with him. Obviously, this is something that's near and dear to his heart. And so I just double checked. Councilor Flores, you had your hand up. Did you forget to put it down? Okay, good. I have a friend of mine that I bet all the time, and so far I usually win the bet that you just forgot to put it down. So that's good.
Oh, wow. You mean I'm the subject of a bet?
Yeah.
I'm glad.
So no more questions, right? Okay, before I begin, before I ask for a motion to adjourn, I just want to offer any of you, if you'd like, a moment to kind of express your condolences to the family of Officer Darian Jarrett, he was a New Mexico State police officer, young man of 28 years old who was attempting to stop a person on the loose, and he got killed. So I'll just start with any of you, if you want to raise your hand and you have anything you'd like to say to the parents. Well, I'm sure we can probably make sure that we can get this over to them.
Of course, Mayor, thank you for bringing this up. Just to be clear, though, he wasn't a New Mexico State police officer. He was a highway patrol officer.
Okay, well,
there's a difference.
I'm pretty sure he was a New Mexico State police officer. I've seen his uniform, and it says New Mexico State Police. But yeah, he used to work.
It's the same as highway patrol. It's the same. It's like
there's actually a transportation division. I think he used to work for them a long time ago, but he transitioned to the New Mexico State Police. So I'll start with the top, and I'll work my way down. Councilor Flores. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. And yes, I would like to express my deepest condolences to to the late Officer Darian Jarrett. And I mean, a 28-year-old man with a wife and family, young children, I think one on the way. Another one on the way is horrible. So I just want to extend my deep, heartfelt condolences to that family, that loss. And I think it's a travesty. But thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Councilor. Mayor Pro Tem? Oh, I'm sorry?
Are we going to have councilor comments later?
Well, no, we don't have council comments. This is strictly-
Right.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I'd like to express my deepest condolences to his wife and his children, to his colleagues at State Police and to the community. It was such a blow to hear Chief speak about him, and just what a kind and good individual he was. This is definitely a blow to law enforcement, and so my deepest condolences to everybody involved. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Beta-Stubbe?
Thank you, Mayor. Heartfelt condolences to the Jarrett family. This is one of the items that we talked about within our own family with the kids, of the service and sacrifice that all of our officers make every day, and the very big challenges and consequences that can come from it. I know that there are many fundraisers going out for the family. I always say, please make sure you're doing your due diligence when looking and verifying these fundraisers. But I know that our family ourselves donated to one as well to help, because it's very difficult raising a family, especially one so young. And our condolences go out to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Vasquez?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I think always shocking and heartbreaking to see somebody lose their life, especially with something like a traffic stop, right? Something that usually is pretty routine. So to the Jarrett family, I know they're going to miss their father. I know that the wife of Mr. Jarrett as well will definitely have a hard time, I'm sure, processing this, but hopefully she feels in community and she feels supported by all those who are helping to raise funds and other types of support for the family. And so, you know, to sacrifice to be in that uniform and do this job when things like this could happen. And so, very sorry to see it, and my condolences go out to the family again. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Bencomo?
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks for opening up this space. I definitely think it was a very hard week for law enforcement last week. You know, we got word of two of our own Las Cruces police officers who were injured. But absolutely my deepest and sincerest condolences to the Jarrett family. I hope that they are surrounded with love and comfort during this time. And it's just absolutely heartbreaking to think about his kids. And yes, I'm glad Councilor Beta-Stubbe brought up the fundraisers. I think I myself visited, you know, House of Graphics on Amador just this morning to provide some cash. I know that they're going to deliver cash right as it is. I know sometimes Facebook fundraisers take a little bit of a portion of that. So I think I'm glad Councilor Beta-Stubbe mentioned doing your due diligence if you're going to be supporting the family with some monetary assistance. So I really, you know, in these moments, I really find myself thankful that we live in such a supportive community.
Thank you, Councilor. I just want to say to the family, to the parents of Officer Jarrett, as well as the mom of his children, my deepest condolences. I never had a chance to meet your son or the father of the children, but I know people who know him, and they thought so highly of him. It's a travesty, and I just want to tell you, your son is a hero, and you know, he put his life on the line to protect those that people he didn't even know, and we can't thank him enough for that. And I seem to recall, and I hope it's the case, that when an officer is killed in the line of duty and has children, I believe there's also, in addition to the money raised, there's a fund set up for them for education purposes. And so I hope that that's the case. But nonetheless, we can't thank you enough for allowing your son to provide and serve in law enforcement. You know, it's a tough job, and you know, it's a calling. And I know that I'm sure enjoyed his time. So, well, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for at least sharing that, and I'm sure we'll be able to let the family know that we shared and sent our condolences. So I'm going to go ahead and ask for a motion and a second to adjourn, and we'll adjourn this work session.
So moved.
Okay. Motion made by Councilor Flores, second by Councilor Bencomo. Christine, will you call the roll, please?
This is on the motion to adjourn the work session. Councilor Betastuvi?
Yes.
Councilor Vasquez?
Yes.
Councilor Bencomo?
Yes.
Councilor Sorg?
Yes.
Councilor Flores?
Yes.
Councilor Gandara?
Yes.
Mayor?
Yes. Okay, so we're adjourned. It's 3:11 p.m. I'm going to stay on so we can do our agenda setting meeting, but you're welcome to stay on. But if not, thank you very much, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, Mayor, I'm ready when you are.
Okay, this is the agenda setting meeting for our February 16th, 2021 City Council meeting. Number 1, non-consent.
1, non-consent.
2, non-consent.
2, non-consent.
3, non-consent.
3, non-consent.
4, non-consent.
4, non-consent.
5, non-consent.
5, non-consent.
6, consent.
6, consent.
7, consent.
7, consent.
8, consent.
8, consent.
9, non-consent.
9, non-consent.
10, non-consent.
10, non-consent.
11, non-consent.
11, non-consent.
12, non-consent.
12, non-consent.
13, consent.
13, consent.
And 14, consent.
14, consent. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Good
Okay,
night.
thanks. See you.
Bye.